The atmosphere in the White House press briefing room crackled with tension as Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt strode confidently to the podium, her stride purposeful, her expression resolute. The journalists quieted, pens poised, cameras focused. This wasn't just another routine briefing. It was a showcase of the Trump administration's forceful approach to governance, and Leavitt was there to deliver news that would send shockwaves through Washington. "Good afternoon, everybody," she began, her voice clear and authoritative. "I apologize for my tardiness, but I came directly from the Oval Office. I have some newsy updates to share from the President, which I know you all very much value and appreciate, so let's get to it." The briefing room, typically a battlefield of contentious exchanges, settled into an anticipatory silence. Leavitt stood as the administration's voice, unflinching, unapologetic, and unafraid of the confrontation that would inevitably follow her announcements. The president promised millions of Christians across the country on the campaign trail that he would create a White House faith office when he returned to the White House, Leavitt stated, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction. And he has delivered on that promise. She detailed how the White House Faith Office had organized an extraordinary week-long celebration for Holy Week ahead of Easter Sunday. President Trump had signed a Holy Week proclamation, filmed a special presidential message, and would be hosting a pre-Easter dinner and a White House staff Easter worship service. The President and First Lady would continue the tradition of the White House Easter egg roll on the South Lawn the following Monday. This opening salvo, focusing on faith and tradition, was strategic. It positioned the administration as one that respected and upheld American values and traditions, a theme that would underpin the entirety of the briefing. If you appreciate a White House that honors traditional American values, hit that subscribe button now to stay updated on how this administration puts faith and family first. But Leavitt was just warming up. In other news, she continued, shifting to economic matters with practiced ease, President Trump is turning America into a manufacturing superpower again. Her announcement about NVIDIA sent a clear message about the administration's economic priorities. The chip-making giant had pledged to produce AI supercomputers entirely within the United States, a $50 billion investment in American infrastructure over the next 4 years. With manufacturing partners, they had commissioned more than 1 million square feet of manufacturing space to build and test NVIDIA Blackwell chips in Arizona and AI supercomputers in Texas. Leavitt's delivery was pointed as she quoted NVIDIA's founder and CEO Jensen Huang, who had touted how the engines of the world's AI infrastructure are being built in the United States for the first time. She paused deliberately before adding, "This is the Trump effect." The press secretary wasn't merely reporting on economic developments. She was crafting a narrative of American resurgence under Trump's leadership. This wasn't just about NVIDIA. It was about the trillions in other U.S. investments announced already. $500 billion from Apple in U.S.-based manufacturing and training, $100 billion from TSMC in U.S.-based chip manufacturing, and the $500 billion private investment led by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank in artificial intelligence infrastructure. Under President Trump, Leavitt declared with conviction, "We're going to produce the cars, the ships, the chips, the airplanes, minerals, and medicines that we need right here in America, at the hands of American workers. If you believe in American manufacturing and bringing jobs back to our shores, make sure to hit that like button right now. We're covering the rebirth of American industry in real time, and you won't want to miss a single update." Having established the administration's commitment to both faith and economic prosperity, Leavitt pivoted to perhaps the most contentious issue of all, border security. Her tone hardened, her delivery became more clipped and precise. "On the border, President Trump continues to break records and protect our homeland," she asserted, before delivering a statistical comparison designed for maximum impact. According to CBP, Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border for the entire month of March 2025 were lower than the first 2 days of March 2024 under Joe Biden. She let that sink in before adding a single emphatic word. Incredible. The comparison was stark, deliberate, and designed to highlight the administration's effectiveness, where its predecessor had allegedly failed. Leavitt wasn't just reporting statistics, she was constructing a before and after narrative that positioned Trump as the solution to Biden's border crisis. But Leavitt wasn't content with abstract numbers. She personalized the threat with a litany of recent ICE arrests, each more disturbing than the last. A 54-year-old Mexican citizen convicted of rape by threat, sodomy with a person under 14 years, and kidnapping in San Jose, California. A 23-year-old Mexican citizen convicted of predatory criminal sexual assault of a child in Cook County, Illinois. a 64-year-old Honduran citizen convicted of murder in Los Angeles County, California. The list continued, each example carefully chosen to reinforce the administration's narrative about illegal immigration and public safety. A 49-year-old Guatemalan convicted of assault and arson in Virginia. A 36-year-old Mexican registered as a sex offender and convicted of sexual assault of a child in Colorado. A 50-year-old Chinese citizen convicted of sex trafficking in Maryland. A 46-year-old Jamaican convicted of 3 counts of rape of a child and 2 counts of indecent assault and battery of a child under 14 in Massachusetts. Leavitt's voice never wavered as she delivered this litany of horrors, each case representing not just a crime, but a failure of the previous administration's immigration policies in the administration's view. As she concluded this section, her voice took on a steely resolve that matched the uncompromising message she delivered. President Trump and our administration will not rest until every single violent illegal alien is removed from our country, she declared. The safety of the American people is too important to settle for anything less. The message was clear. This was not an administration that would apologize for its tough stance on immigration. This was an administration that viewed border security not as a political issue, but as a moral imperative, a matter of life and death for American citizens. If you're concerned about the safety of American communities and want to see more coverage of how this administration is tackling crime and illegal immigration, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Our channel brings you the raw facts that mainstream media often overlooks. Having established the administration's unyielding stance on immigration, Leavitt leaned further into controversy. Her voice took on an edge of indignation as she addressed media coverage of a recent deportation case. On that note, the Democrat and media outrage over the deportation of Abrego Garcia, an MS-13 El Salvadorian illegal alien criminal who was hiding in Maryland, has been nothing short of despicable, she said, her contempt evident. Based on the sensationalism of many of the people in this room, you would think we deported a candidate for Father of the Year. The press room tensed. Leavitt was directly challenging the journalists before her, accusing them of misplaced priorities and biased coverage. It was a confrontational approach that characterized this administration's relationship with the media, direct, accusatory, and unapologetic. That's because, unfortunately, many in this country care more about this quote-unquote Maryland father, illegal alien, MS-13 gang member, than a Maryland mother and an American citizen who was brutally murdered at the hands of a different illegal alien, Leavitt continued, building to her central point. She then pivoted to the case of Rachel Morin, a 37-year-old mother of 5 who had been murdered while jogging northeast of Baltimore. The details Leavitt shared were deliberately graphic and disturbing. Rachel had been ambushed, strangled, and beaten to death before her body was stuffed in a tunnel drain. A Maryland jury had found illegal alien Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez guilty of the murder. The Morin family finally got justice yesterday, Leavitt noted, before adding the sobering reality. But they will never get Rachel back. Our hearts go out to Rachel's family, her 5 children, and her mother Patty, who has suffered the unimaginable loss of her daughter. The juxtaposition was deliberate and powerful. Media concern for a deported Mississippi 13 gang member versus the life of an American mother. In Leavitt's framing, the media's priorities were not just misguided but morally indefensible. This moment of national tragedy deserves our attention and respect. If you agree that American victims of crime deserve more media coverage than criminals, share this video with someone who needs to hear this truth. Together, we can ensure these stories aren't forgotten. Leavitt continued, shifting to recent policy actions by the administration. She detailed President Trump's signing of a national security presidential memorandum, directing federal agencies administering federal land on the border to make land available to the Defense Department in a new national defense area. This followed the president's Day 1 executive order committing to marshal all available resources to stop what Leavitt characterized as the unprecedented flood of illegal aliens into our country. Once again, the president is fulfilling another key promise, she emphasized, detailing how the new national defense area spanned more than 170 miles across the border in New Mexico, with plans to add more than 90 miles in Texas in the coming weeks. This area would enhance the administration's ability to detect, interdict, and prosecute illegal aliens, criminal gangs, and terrorists, as well as bolster defenses against fentanyl and other dangerous narcotics. Leavitt concluded this section with a political flourish, citing a new poll published that morning showing President Trump's approval rating at an all-time high. That's because the president is working tirelessly to keep his promises to the American people, as I just saw him doing today in the Oval Office, she stated, completing her opening remarks before turning to questions. The first question came from Matthew Foley, editor-in-chief of the Washington Reporter, whom Leavitt had recognized for the new media seat in the briefing room. Foley inquired about the administration's decision to freeze approximately $2 billion in funding to Harvard University due to concerns about anti-Semitism on campus. Leavitt's response was measured but firm. When it comes to Harvard, the president's position on this is grounded in common sense, she explained, in the basic principle that Jewish American students, or students of any faith, should not be illegally harassed and targeted on our nation's college campuses. She referenced the stunning confession by then Harvard President Claudine Gay, who had stated that bullying and harassment, quote, depended on the context. President Trump, Leavitt emphasized, had made it clear that he would not tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism in violation of federal law. The president made it clear to Harvard, follow federal law, no longer break Title VI, which was passed by Congress to ensure no student can be discriminated against on the basis of race, and you will receive federal funding, Leavitt stated. Unfortunately, Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously. She added a pointed question. With Harvard possessing a more than $50 billion endowment, why were American taxpayers subsidizing a university with billions in the bank? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists, she concluded. The confrontational middle section of the briefing continued as reporters probed further into controversial administration policies. The exchanges grew increasingly tense, with Leavitt holding firm on the administration's positions regarding immigration, foreign policy, and domestic concerns. If you believe universities must uphold federal anti-discrimination laws to receive taxpayer funding, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your voice matters in this critical debate about how American institutions treat all students fairly. When asked about tariffs and potential relief for automakers, Leavitt emphasized the president's flexibility in negotiations while maintaining his commitment to American workers. Ultimately, his goal in his fair trade deals that he is pursuing with many countries around the world is to put the American worker first, she stated, referencing a recent White House meeting with automakers and auto workers who supported the president's approach. On questions about Ukraine and a potential visit by President Trump following an invitation from President Zelensky, Leavitt acknowledged she hadn't discussed the matter with the president and had no plans to share regarding a trip to Ukraine. Regarding China, when asked about AI-generated videos posted by Chinese officials depicting Trump, J.D. Vance and Elon Musk working in factories assembling Nike shoes and iPhones, Leavitt offered a defiant response. Whoever made it clearly does not see the potential of the American worker, the American workforce, she said. The president believes in the American people, and he knows that we have the best not only consumer base in the world, but also the best workforce in the world. Questions about a potential ban on members of Congress trading stocks, concerns from farmers about trade wars affecting spring planting, and threats against administration officials followed. Leavitt addressed each with the administration's characteristic blend of directness and unwavering commitment to its policy positions. As the briefing neared its conclusion, Leavitt delivered what would prove to be one of its most newsworthy moments. Former President Biden was scheduled to deliver his first major speech since leaving office that evening, focusing on Social Security under the Trump administration. Leavitt couldn't resist a jab. My first reaction when seeing former President Biden was speaking tonight was I'm shocked that he is speaking at nighttime. I thought his bedtime was much earlier. The press room stirred at the barb, but Leavitt pressed on, addressing the substance of Biden's anticipated remarks. Let me make it very clear ahead of former President Biden's remarks, she said firmly. President Trump, is absolutely certain about protecting Social Security benefits for law-abiding, tax-paying American citizens and seniors who have paid into this program. He will always protect that program. He campaigned on it, he protected it in his first term, and he's back again to continue protecting it. Then came the announcement. On the topic of Social Security, I have some news before I let you all go. Later this afternoon, the president will be signing a presidential memorandum aimed at stopping illegal aliens and other ineligible people from obtaining Social Security Act benefits. Leavitt detailed how the memorandum would direct the administration to ensure ineligible aliens were not receiving funds from Social Security Act programs, expand the Social Security Administration's fraud prosecutor program to at least 50 U.S. attorney offices, and establish a Medicare and Medicaid fraud prosecution program in 15 U.S. attorney offices. The memorandum would also require investigation of earning reports for individuals aged 100 or older, with mismatched Social Security records to combat identity theft, and direct the Social Security Administration to consider reinstating civil monetary penalties against individuals who engage in Social Security fraud. This announcement was clearly timed to preempt and counter Biden's speech. These taxpayer-funded benefits should be only for eligible taxpayers, Leavitt emphasized, before delivering a final swipe at the former president. And President Biden should think about what he did in his last term, which is allow tens of millions of illegal people into our country, many of whom were fraudulently receiving these benefits. With that, she concluded the briefing. So you'll hear from the president on that later, and we will see you later in the East Room. Bye, guys. The White House press briefing had been a masterclass in the Trump administration's communication strategy, unapologetic, confrontational, and focused on delivering results for the American people as they define them. From faith initiatives to economic growth, from border security to protecting Social Security, Leavitt had presented a cohesive narrative of an administration fulfilling its promises and standing firm against criticism. This isn't just another press briefing, it's a window into how this administration operates daily to implement its agenda. If you want to understand what's really happening in Washington beyond the media spin, hit that subscribe button now. Our channel brings you the analysis and context you need to truly understand these critical policy battles. As journalists packed up their notebooks and camera crews disassembled their equipment, the real impact of the briefing was just beginning to unfold. The administration's announcements, particularly regarding Harvard's funding freeze and the Social Security memorandum, would dominate news cycles, shape public discourse, and likely influence policy outcomes. But beneath the specific policies and announcements lay a deeper message. This was an administration committed to its vision for America, undeterred by criticism, and willing to confront its opponents directly. Whether that approach would ultimately succeed in achieving its goals remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, the Trump administration was not backing down. The briefing room emptied, but the echoes of Leavitt's forceful delivery lingered. In living rooms and on social media platforms across America, debates would rage about immigration, higher education, and the proper role of government. The administration had thrown down multiple gauntlets, and the political battles would only intensify in the days ahead. Behind the scenes, President Trump was preparing to sign the Social Security memorandum, setting in motion a new front in the administration's broader effort to reshape American immigration policy. The memorandum would almost certainly face legal challenges, but the administration appeared confident in its authority and determined to proceed regardless of opposition. Meanwhile, at Harvard University, administrators were weighing their options in the face of the announced funding freeze. With billions of dollars at stake, the university faced difficult decisions about how to respond to the administration's demands regarding anti-Semitism on campus. The controversy highlighted the growing tensions between academic institutions and federal authorities over issues of free speech, discrimination, and the proper role of government in higher education. On the border, the national defense area was taking shape, a physical manifestation of the administration's hardline approach to immigration enforcement. For supporters, it represented a long-overdue effort to secure the nation's boundaries. For critics, it symbolized a divisive and potentially harmful policy that risked stigmatizing immigrants and undermining America's traditional role as a welcoming nation. If these policy battles matter to you, if you care about who controls the destiny of America's borders, universities, and social programs, make sure you're part of our community. Comment below with your thoughts and share this video with friends who need to understand what's happening in Washington right now. The NVIDIA announcement highlighted another facet of the administration's economic strategy, a push for American manufacturing and technological leadership, particularly in cutting-edge fields like artificial intelligence. The $50 billion investment represented not just an economic win, but a symbolic victory in the administration's quest to position America as the world's premier manufacturing power. For ordinary Americans watching these developments unfold, the implications varied widely depending on their perspectives. For some, the administration's actions represented a welcome return to policies that prioritized American citizens and national interests. For others, they signaled a troubling retreat from America's traditional role as a global leader and beacon of opportunity. What remained undeniable was the administration's skill at dominating the national conversation and setting the terms of debate. By announcing the Social Security memorandum just hours before Biden's scheduled speech on the same topic, the White House had effectively preempted the former president and forced him to respond to their framing rather than establishing his own narrative. This media strategy, proactive, aggressive, and always on offense, was a hallmark of Trump's approach to governance. Rather than defending against criticism, the administration consistently sought to put its opponents on the defensive, using bold announcements and provocative statements to control the news cycle and shape public perception. As evening approached, attention would shift to Biden's speech and his response to the administration's Social Security announcement. Would he adjust his remarks to address the president's memorandum, or proceed with his planned criticism of the administration's handling of Social Security offices and services? Either way, the White House had ensured that the former president would be operating within a framework they had established. Don't miss our upcoming analysis of Biden's response to these bombshell announcements. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we break down what this means for Social Security recipients and American taxpayers. The Harvard funding controversy highlighted another aspect of the administration's approach, using financial leverage to influence institutional behavior. By threatening to withhold $2 billion in federal funding, the administration was attempting to force one of America's most prestigious universities to change its policies regarding anti-Semitism and campus speech. This approach, using the power of the federal purse to shape institutional policies, was not new in American governance, but the Trump administration employed it with particular vigor and directness. Rather than working through regulatory processes or quiet diplomacy, the administration made public demands and backed them with immediate financial consequences. For supporters, this represented a refreshing willingness to use federal power to uphold important values like protecting Jewish students from harassment. For critics, it signified an overreach that threatened academic freedom and institutional autonomy. The debate reflected deeper divisions in American society about the proper roles of government, educational institutions, and civil society in addressing complex issues of discrimination and free expression. The administration's handling of the Abrego Garcia deportation case and its contrast with the Rachel Morin murder similarly reflected its approach to communication. Personalize issues, present clear moral contrasts, and directly challenge media narratives that conflict with the administration's perspective. By juxtaposing media coverage of a deported Mississippi 13 gang member with what Leavitt characterized as insufficient attention to the murder of an American mother, the administration sought to frame the immigration debate not as a matter of policy differences, but as a moral choice between protecting American citizens and prioritizing the interests of those who had entered the country illegally. This framing, stark, emotional, and morally charged, was designed to resonate with the administration's base while putting critics on the defensive. Rather than engaging in nuanced debates about immigration policy, the administration presented the issue in terms of good versus evil, citizens versus criminals, protection versus peril. The effectiveness of this approach would ultimately be judged by public opinion and policy outcomes, but its impact on the national discourse was immediate and significant. By shaping the terms of debate and forcing opponents to respond to their framing, the administration maintained the initiative and kept critics on the defensive. If you believe Americans deserve straight talk about the realities of border security, share this video now. Together we can cut through the media fog and focus on the truth about what's happening in our communities. As the briefing concluded, the questions from reporters had highlighted the ongoing tensions between the administration and the press corps. The exchanges were often confrontational, with Leavitt firmly defending the administration's positions while challenging what she perceived as media bias or misrepresentation. This contentious relationship, characterized by mutual suspicion and occasional hostility, reflected broader divisions in American society about the role of the press, the nature of truth, and the proper functioning of democratic institutions. For the administration supporters, the confrontational approach represented a necessary correction to perceived media bias. For critics, it signaled a dangerous erosion of press freedom and government accountability. Despite these tensions, the briefing had accomplished its primary purpose, communicating the administration's priorities, actions, and perspectives to the American public. From faith initiatives to economic growth, from border security to Social Security protection, Leavitt had presented a coherent narrative of an administration fulfilling its promises and standing firm against opposition. Whether this narrative would ultimately resonate with a majority of Americans remained to be seen, but the administration had clearly established its message and forced its opponents to respond on terms it had defined. In the high-stakes world of political communication, where controlling the narrative often determines policy outcomes, this represented a significant achievement. As night fell on Washington, the impact of the briefing continued to reverberate through the political system. The administration's announcements, particularly regarding Harvard's funding and the Social Security memorandum, would shape debates, influence policies, and potentially affect the lives of millions of Americans. For ordinary citizens watching these developments unfold, the challenge remains sorting through competing narratives, conflicting facts, and polarized perspectives. In an era of information overload and partisan division, understanding the true implications of government actions had never been more important or more difficult. What remained clear was that the Trump administration was pursuing its agenda with characteristic boldness, undeterred by criticism, and determined to reshape American policy in accordance with its vision. From the border to the university campus, from trade negotiations to Social Security Administration, the impact of its decisions would be felt far beyond the confines of the White House briefing room. The administration's focus on protecting Social Security benefits specifically for law-abiding, tax-paying American citizens and seniors, while cracking down on potential fraud by illegal immigrants, reflected its broader approach to governance, prioritizing the interests of American citizens as it defined them, particularly those who had played by the rules and contributed to the system. This approach, America First in both rhetoric and policy, resonated strongly with the administration's base while alienating critics who saw it as exclusionary or divisive. The debate over the Social Security memorandum would likely reflect these broader divisions, with supporters hailing it as common-sense protection of taxpayer resources and critics condemning it as demonizing immigrants for political gain. What couldn't be disputed was the administration's skill at positioning itself as the defender of ordinary Americans against perceived threats, whether from illegal immigration, biased media coverage, anti-Semitism on college campuses, or foreign economic competitors. This framing, casting the administration as the champion of the people against various elites and outsiders, had proven politically powerful and continued to shape its communication strategy. If you're concerned about the future of Social Security and who gets access to these critical benefits, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you the real story behind these policy changes and what they mean for hardworking Americans. The briefing had also highlighted the administration's economic message, centered on American manufacturing, job creation, and technological leadership. The NVIDIA announcement, prominently featured by Leavitt, embodied this vision of America as a manufacturing superpower, reclaiming its position at the forefront of global industry and innovation. This economic nationalism, focused on bringing jobs and investment back to American shores, formed a core component of the administration's appeal to working-class voters and communities that had experienced economic dislocation from globalization and technological change. By highlighting investments like NVIDIA's and framing them as a direct result of Trump's policies, the Trump effect, the administration sought to build a narrative of economic revival under its leadership. Whether this narrative would be borne out by broader economic indicators remained to be seen, but the administration had clearly established its economic message and positioned itself as the champion of American workers and manufacturers. The administration's focus on faith initiatives, highlighted at the beginning of the briefing, reflected another aspect of its approach to governance, an emphasis on traditional values and religious expression that resonated with many conservative and evangelical voters. By establishing a White House faith office and organizing events for Holy Week, the administration signaled its respect for religious traditions and its commitment to protecting religious expression. For supporters, these initiatives represented a welcome recognition of faith's importance in American life. For critics, they sometimes raised concerns about the separation of church and state. Like many aspects of the administration's approach, its emphasis on faith both unified supporters and divided the broader electorate along familiar cultural and political lines. The border security announcements, particularly the creation of a national defense area spanning hundreds of miles along the southern border, embodied the administration's tough stance on immigration and its determination to use all available resources to stem the flow of illegal entrants. This approach, framing immigration primarily as a security issue requiring robust enforcement, defined the administration's handling of the border from its first day in office. For supporters, these efforts represented a necessary response to what they perceived as a crisis of illegal immigration threatening American safety and sovereignty. For critics, they signaled an unnecessarily harsh approach that risked violating human rights and undermining America's traditional role as a nation of immigrants. The debate reflected deeper divisions in American society about national identity, cultural change, and the proper balance between openness and security. What remained clear was that immigration would continue to be a defining issue for the administration, both in policy terms and as a political message. By highlighting ICE arrests of violent criminals and contrasting media coverage of deported gang members with the victims of crimes committed by illegal immigrants, the administration sought to frame the immigration debate in terms that resonated emotionally with its base and put critics on the defensive. If you believe in strong borders and prioritizing the safety of American communities, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We bring you the stories that matter, the ones that affect real American families like the Morans, without the political spin. As the day progressed, attention would shift to President Trump's signing of the Social Security Memorandum and former President Biden's response. The political battle over Social Security, a program with deep roots in American society and broad public support, would likely intensify, with both sides claiming to be its true defender. For the Trump administration, the memorandum represented an opportunity to demonstrate its commitment to protecting benefits for American citizens while addressing what it perceived as fraud and abuse. By framing the issue in terms of preventing illegal immigrants from accessing benefits, the administration sought to tap into broader concerns about immigration while positioning itself as the guardian of a vital social program. For critics, the memorandum might represent an unnecessary and potentially harmful policy, driven more by political considerations than genuine concern for the program's integrity. The debate would likely reflect broader disagreements about immigration, the proper role of government in providing social support, and the nature of American identity and belonging. What remained undeniable was the administration's skill at dominating the news cycle, setting the agenda, and forcing opponents to respond on its terms. By announcing the memorandum just hours before Biden's scheduled speech on Social Security, the White House had effectively seized control of the narrative and positioned itself as proactive rather than reactive. This approach, always on offense, never on defense, defined the administration's media strategy and often enabled it to maintain the initiative in political battles. Whether this approach would ultimately result in sustainable policy changes or merely short-term political advantages remained to be seen, but its impact on the day's news coverage was immediate and significant. As night fell on Washington, the reverberations of Leavitt's briefing continued to be felt throughout the political system. From Harvard's administration to Border Patrol agents, from Social Security administrators to auto workers, the policies and positions announced would shape decisions, influence behaviors, and potentially affect the lives of millions of Americans. For citizens trying to understand these developments and their implications, the challenge remained sorting through competing narratives, conflicting information, and polarized perspectives. In an era of information overload and partisan division, making sense of government actions had never been more important or more difficult. What remained clear was that the Trump administration was pursuing its agenda with characteristic boldness, undeterred by criticism, and determined to reshape American policy according to its vision. From the border to the university campus, from trade negotiations to Social Security administration, the impact of its decisions would extend far beyond the confines of the White House briefing room. The administration's emphasis on fulfilling campaign promises, a theme Leavitt returned to repeatedly during the briefing, reflected its understanding of political accountability and its determination to deliver concrete results to its base. By highlighting promises made and kept, from the White House Faith Office to border enforcement, the administration sought to build credibility and trust with supporters who had sometimes been disappointed by politicians' unfulfilled pledges. This focus on tangible accomplishments, rather than aspiration or rhetoric alone, characterized the administration's approach to governance and communication. By emphasizing specific actions taken and results achieved, Leavitt presented a picture of an administration focused on delivery, rather than declaration. Stay with us as we continue tracking this administration's promises and actions. If you value holding politicians accountable for their pledges, subscribe now and join our community of informed citizens who demand results, not just rhetoric. The confrontational exchanges between Leavitt and the press corps highlighted another aspect of the administration's approach: its willingness to challenge media narratives directly and forcefully. Rather than accepting the premise of critical questions or attempting to find common ground with skeptical reporters, Leavitt often countered with accusations of bias or misplaced priorities. This approach, viewing the press not as a neutral arbiter but as an often hostile participant in political battles, reflected the administration's broader media strategy and its understanding of the changed media landscape. In an era of fragmented information sources and declining trust in traditional journalism, the administration saw little benefit in deferring to media frameworks or accepting their definition of issues. Instead, Leavitt and other administration officials consistently sought to establish their own narratives, challenge unfavorable framing, and speak directly to supporters through both traditional and alternative media channels. This approach, bypassing traditional media filters whenever possible, had proven effective in political campaigns and was now being applied to governance. For supporters, this represented a refreshing willingness to challenge perceived media bias and speak plainly to the American people. For critics, it signaled a dangerous erosion of press freedom and government accountability. The debate reflected broader divisions in American society about the role of journalism, the nature of truth, and the proper functioning of democratic institutions. What remained clear was that the administration viewed its relationship with the press as inherently adversarial and saw little benefit in adopting a more conciliatory approach. By directly challenging journalists' assumptions, questioning their priorities, and presenting alternative narratives, Leavitt and other officials sought to prevent unfavorable framing and maintain control of their message. The questions about trade policy, particularly regarding tariffs and their potential impact on American farmers, highlighted another aspect of the administration's economic approach: its willingness to use tariffs and other trade measures as leverage in international negotiations, even at the risk of short-term disruption for some domestic constituencies. This approach, prioritizing what the administration saw as long-term strategic advantages over short-term economic harmony, reflected its broader economic nationalism and its belief that previous administrations had sacrificed American interests on the altar of global integration. By imposing tariffs, threatening further measures, and demanding better terms from trading partners, the administration sought to rebalance global economic relationships in America's favor. For supporters, this represented a long-overdue assertion of American economic interests after decades of unfair treatment. For critics, it risked damaging valuable trading relationships, increasing costs for American consumers and businesses, and potentially triggering retaliatory measures from other countries. The debate reflected broader disagreements about the benefits and costs of globalization, the proper role of government in managing international economic relations, and the nature of American economic interests. What remained undeniable was the administration's determination to reshape American trade policy according to its vision, regardless of short-term disruptions or opposition from traditional economic stakeholders. By highlighting the potential for relief while maintaining its commitment to American workers, the administration sought to balance immediate concerns with its longer-term strategic objectives. The questions about China, particularly regarding AI-generated videos depicting Trump, VP Vance, and Elon Musk working in factories, highlighted the complex and often contentious relationship between the world's two largest economies. Leavitt's response, emphasizing the potential of American workers and the administration's focus on bringing investments home, reflected the administration's broader approach to China, viewing it primarily as an economic competitor and potential threat rather than a partner or ally. This frame, seeing China through the lens of competition and conflict rather than cooperation, shaped the administration's approach to trade, technology, defense, and diplomacy. By emphasizing American manufacturing capabilities and workforce quality, Leavitt was not just responding to a specific question, but articulating a broader vision of American economic nationalism in opposition to Chinese influence. For supporters, this represented a necessary correction after decades of policies that had allegedly benefited China at America's expense. For critics, it risked escalating tensions, damaging valuable economic relationships, and potentially leading to broader conflict. The debate reflected deeper divisions in American society about globalization, national security, and the proper balance between economic openness and protection of domestic industries. What remained clear was that the administration viewed its relationship with China primarily through the lens of competition, and was determined to use all available tools, from tariffs to investment restrictions to public messaging, to advance what it perceived as American interests in this competition. The questions about Harvard's funding freeze highlighted another front in the administration's broader cultural and political battles: its willingness to use federal power to influence institutional behavior on issues related to identity, expression, and discrimination. By threatening to withhold $2 billion in funding unless Harvard addressed concerns about anti-Semitism, the administration was leveraging federal resources to shape campus policies and practices. This approach, using financial pressure to influence institutional decisions, was not unique to the Trump administration, but its application to issues of campus speech and climate reflected the administration's broader concerns about what it perceived as left-leaning bias in higher education and cultural institutions. By highlighting the case of Harvard specifically, America's oldest and one of its most prestigious universities, the administration was making a high-profile statement about its priorities and values. For supporters, this represented a necessary intervention to protect Jewish students from harassment and discrimination. For critics, it signaled an inappropriate political intrusion into academic governance that threatened institutional autonomy and academic freedom. The debate reflected deeper divisions in American society about the proper roles of government, educational institutions, and civil society in addressing complex issues of discrimination, expression, and identity. What remained undeniable was the administration's willingness to use federal power to advance its vision of proper institutional behavior, particularly on issues related to culture, identity, and expression. By highlighting Harvard's substantial endowment and questioning why taxpayers should subsidize such a wealthy institution, Leavitt was framing the issue not just in terms of anti-Semitism, but also in terms of economic fairness and proper use of public resources. As the day's events unfolded beyond the briefing room, the impact of the administration's announcements and positions would be felt throughout American society, from university administrations to border communities, from social security offices to manufacturing plants. The policies articulated by Leavitt would shape decisions, influence behaviors, and potentially affect the lives of millions of Americans. For citizens trying to understand these developments and their implications, the challenge remained sorting through competing narratives, conflicting information, and polarized perspectives. In an era of information overload and partisan division, making sense of government actions had never been more important or more difficult. What remained clear was that the Trump administration was pursuing its agenda with characteristic boldness, undeterred by criticism, and determined to reshape American policy according to its vision. From immigration enforcement to higher education, from trade policy to social programs, the administration was seeking to implement fundamental changes that reflected its understanding of American interests and values. Whether these changes would ultimately improve American life or exacerbate existing problems remained a matter of fierce debate, a debate that would continue long after Leavitt's briefing concluded and the cameras stopped rolling. What couldn't be denied was the administration's determination to pursue its vision, regardless of opposition or criticism, and its skill at dominating the national conversation even in the face of significant resistance. That determination, to pursue its agenda despite obstacles, to reshape American policy according to its vision, and to communicate directly with supporters beyond traditional media filters, defined the administration's approach to governance and would continue to shape American politics for years to come. As Leavitt's final words echoed through the briefing room, "So you'll hear from the president on that later, and we will see you later in the East Room," they signaled not just the end of a press briefing, but the continuation of a broader political project, the reshaping of American government, policy, and society, according to the Trump administration's vision of American greatness. That project, ambitious, controversial, and consequential, would continue to divide Americans along familiar lines of party, ideology, and culture. But whether one supported or opposed the administration's approach, one thing remained clear. It was pursuing its agenda with unwavering determination and formidable skill, reshaping the landscape of American politics in ways that would be felt long after the cameras stopped rolling and the reporters left the room. If you want to stay informed about the real impact of these policies on American communities, families, and institutions, subscribe to our channel now. In these divided times, having accurate, in-depth analysis has never been more important. Join our community today, and let's navigate this complex political landscape together. As evening approached and Washington prepared for Trump's signing of the Social Security memorandum and Biden's response, the full impact of the day's announcements was just beginning to unfold. From Harvard's administration to border communities, from Social Security offices to manufacturing plants, the policies articulated by Leavitt would shape decisions, influence behaviors, and potentially affect the lives of millions of Americans for years to come. The battle for America's future, its identity, its prosperity, its security, and its values, continued beyond the confines of the White House briefing room, playing out in communities across the nation. And at the center of that battle stood an administration determined to implement its vision, regardless of opposition, and skilled at shaping the terms of debate to its advantage. Whether that vision would ultimately succeed in making America great again, or lead it further into division and decline, remained to be seen. But what couldn't be denied was the administration's unwavering commitment to its cause, and its remarkable ability to dominate the national conversation even in the face of significant resistance. As Leavitt stepped away from the podium and the briefing concluded, the real work of governance and the political battles that inevitably accompanied it continued. The policies announced, the positions defended, and the priorities established would shape American politics, society, and culture for years to come, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's future, regardless of the administration's ultimate fate. In the end, that might be the most significant legacy of moments like this White House press briefing, not just the specific policies announced or positions defended, but the broader reshaping of American governance and discourse, according to a particular vision of national identity, interest, and purpose. Whether that vision would ultimately prevail remained uncertain, but its impact on American life was already profound and would continue to be felt long after the cameras stopped rolling and the reporters left the room.